All right, good morning, good morning. I want to start out by telling you, you don't see what you think you see. By that, I don't mean life is an illusion. There are philosophical questions that come around that, like life is an illusion, these things that we deal with aren't real. That's not what I'm talking about. Life is real. The things that God has created, the choices that we make in life are real. They're very significant. I'm talking about what you really see, like what you see on any given moment. It's not what you think you see. Let me explain. I'm talking about how your brains work. Our brains, the way they work, connected to our eyes, you can only clearly focus on about 1/60th, that's small, 1/60th of what's actually in front of your face, like your whole field of vision, if you will. What's in front of your face, in front of your eyes, that's about 190 degrees all the way around without like moving your eyes. That's 190 degrees. So 120 of that is what you sort of see with your left eye and your right eye. 70 of that is on the outside. That's what's called your peripheral vision. So like 35 degrees over here and 35 degrees over there. But in reality, the way your brains and your eyes work, you actually only focus on about 2% of anything at a given moment. So all the rest of what you think you see, because there's 120 degrees, but that difference, the 2% and the 120%, what you think you see, your brain actually just fills in. It fills in what it thinks is supposed to be there, or what it saw a moment ago. Like I'm looking at this red box, but now I'm looking at Drew. But my brain can sort of fill in that there's a red box over there if I'm sort of looking in the middle, and it fills in that Drew's over there, sort of. But you don't really see what you think you see when we're looking around. So this is why when you think you're looking for something, you can't exactly find it. I was getting ready for work this past week. I normally shave a little bit before I get ready for work, and I dropped the little attachment. It's a small little attachment that goes on my razor, and it fell on this carpet in our bathroom, and the carpet, it's a little busy. It's got a pattern to it. And I was looking everywhere for that razor attachment. I was like, I just dropped it. Why can I not find this attachment? And it was right there in the middle of the carpet. I just couldn't see it. Sometimes we say it just blended in. You ever said that or heard that? We say things just sort of blend in, but that's not exactly what happens. Your brain fills in the rest of the pattern there of that carpet or whatever it is, and you can't see the thing you're looking for because you're not focused on it. You have to focus on something to clearly see it. That's why somebody, one person goes to the refrigerator, or one person goes to the, pantry or the closet or whatever, and they're looking for something and they can't find it, and they call out to somebody else like, I can't see whatever the thing is I was sent to go pick up. It's just because the guys don't focus on it. Ladies, that's all it is. He just needs to focus a little bit. So hopefully I can alleviate some marriage frustration, or maybe I brought up a pain point there. I'm not sure. But my point is, we see what we focus on. So our key point in our passage today is going to be, you see, or you get, you comprehend, you're encouraged by, you're energized by, you're built up by what you focus on. So what you focus on is very important. So today we will see in our passage, key point of our passage today, key point of the whole of the book of Hebrews is, so focus on Jesus, so that you get him, so that you're impacted by him, so that you're encouraged by him, energized by him, driven even by him, because he is the one who saves us. So chapter 3 is significant. This passage that Drew read for us is significant for a couple of reasons. One, it takes a turn. It makes a change. Up until this point, a lot of what we have been reading in Hebrews is a description, explanation, description, explanation. Really powerful descriptions and explanations of who Jesus is, what he has done, how we are to think about Jesus. But then in chapter 3, it begins to take a bit of a turn, and we see what biblical commentators call exhortation. That means the writer of Hebrews, which we kind of view, he's like a pastor writing to a church back in that first century, and he's beginning to turn out and exhort them, call them to something, ask something of them. Because these things are true about Jesus, he begins to now ask things of the readers, ask things of the congregation. And the basic form, the beginning of the exhortation here is just basically this: consider Jesus. Contemplate Jesus. Get your mind around Jesus. Meditate on Jesus, who all he is. He's basically saying here what I've begun to say this morning. Focus on Jesus. We are called, people, humanity, we are called to be Jesus's disciples. That is one of the main points of life. Become a disciple of Jesus. To be a disciple, that means to be a follower. If you are a follower, you got to have your eyes on the leader. If you're playing follow the leader, you got to follow the leader. It says you got to focus on him. That's one of the main key themes of the whole book. And I've said this before, key themes. What do I mean by key themes? If you think of a key unlocks something, right? If you have to get the key to unlock an understanding, or if like you're playing a video game, you got to get the key, acquire the thing in the video game, so you escape a level, or you defeat the bad guy, or you win the game, or whatever it is. These 6 verses that Drew read for us and that we're focused on this morning, there are multiple key themes over and over, themes that we will see played out throughout the rest of the book. So we may read this and say that's kind of interesting and skip over it, because it's all tied together. And throughout the rest of the book, he's going to be building on a lot of these key themes. And he highlights, like, this is the main point, to focus on Jesus. We see it at what many commentators think is like the highlight of the book, what he's building up to in Romans chapter 12 down the road, which we'll get to next year. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Then he says, looking to Jesus, the founder and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame of it. And he's even now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. And so consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. The high point of the book and our passage in chapter 3 today is focus on Jesus, who he is, what he actually did, why that matters for you, what your faith in him actually is. It's your salvation. It's how you should be living out this life. Focus on Jesus. It's woven into our logo. Here at the church at Bevo, we've had this logo for a long time, right? Word, Spirit, mission, and then there's that colon or that pipe symbol. All of these things point to Jesus. The Word points to Jesus. The Holy Spirit helps us understand Jesus. Our mission is to go and tell about Jesus. It's all about Jesus in this life. In our passage, it says first, who should consider Christ? He starts out by saying, listen, I'm talking to holy brothers here. Now, let me just point out or alleviate any confusion. When the Bible often says brothers, it's gender neutral in a sense. He may be masculine and say brothers, but he means everybody. Okay, don't take anything by that. It's a lot like saying I've appreciated this. Like, I'm from the South and I use y'all a lot. It's a word that has a lot of usages. You know, you can talk about a lot of different people when saying y'all. But here in the Midwest, I've learned you guys say you guys a lot, and you don't mean when you walk in a room and you say, "Hey, you guys." You don't necessarily mean just the guys in the room. You mean everybody in the room. Hey, you guys, that's how it is. Holy brothers is everybody. But it's the holy brothers. It's the ones who have been made holy by the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. We talked about this last week, how Jesus, his purpose was to come to this earth, take on humanity, and be this big word that we meditated on last week, the propitiation for the sins of humanity. That means the only atoning sacrifice for the sins of humanity. The sacrifice, the only sacrifice that could be made that satisfied God and washed away all the sins for all those who look to him in faith. For those who look to Jesus in faith, his sacrifice, our sins are cleansed. We are made holy That's who he's talking to. He's saying, I'm talking to you guys. Those who are, number two, sharers in what he calls the heavenly calling. This is interesting. The only place in the whole Bible you see this description, heavenly calling. And we'll see a lot in Hebrews about heavenly, and you see a lot in the Bible about a calling, but this is the only place in the whole Bible that puts those two things together. We have a heavenly calling. God has called us out of darkness into light and towards something. Towards an eternity with him, towards the afterlife, towards the world to come that we read about a few weeks ago. Much like that first Hebrew, Abraham was called out to a land that God would give him. We are called out of sinful lives into a new life to get somewhere one day, to be united with God in relationship forever and ever. We have a heavenly calling. So he's beginning to build on this. This should make a difference. So he says, take notice. Pay attention to what we have heard and learned about Jesus. Pay attention who you're focusing on, who he is. Focus on his person. And he gives us two descriptions here of this person. For the heavenly brothers who have a heavenly calling, focus on Jesus. He calls him the apostle and the high priest of our confession. I could probably preach a whole Sunday on these things, but I won't. First, the apostle. This is the only place in the Bible that we read Jesus isn't called an apostle. This is super interesting, the stuff that Hebrews is revealing to us. That means if you're an apostle, you are a sent one. Someone has sent you. And Jesus is the apostle. He is the sent one. Jesus said this over and over. I'm sent by the Father. I'm sent into this world. I'm sent to you guys to tell you things and do these works. And he is the high priest. That definitely will be a key theme in the book of Hebrews that we will see over and over. We saw it last week, and the writer of Hebrews will build upon this, how Jesus is our high priest and all that that means. He says Jesus is the apostle and he's the high priest of our confession. That is powerful. Like the beginning of our salvation, when we truly get it about Jesus, we should then make a confession that we get it. We get who he is, and we are telling others, whether formally or informally, oh, I believe this. That is so true. It's what we sing about out loud on Sunday mornings. When we have conversations with people, we are agreeing with them. I believe in this message about Jesus. This confession is the beginning of our faith, and it's the ongoing of our faith. Well, just one description of this in the Bible. Classic passage from Romans chapter 10. It says, the word is near you. It's in your mouth and it's in your heart, on the inside, and it's what you say. That is, this is the word of faith that we're proclaiming, because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and you believe in your heart that God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one is confessed and is saved. Romans agrees and Hebrews agrees. You believe in your heart, you understand, you get who Jesus is, and then you tell that outwardly. It's both believing something, not just in your head, but inside your heart, and then you're making sure that you take a step, you take an action, you declare it to other people to confirm it. This is really real. We say sometimes we put our money where our mouth is. You have to not just get it on the inside, but do something with it. This will be a theme also in the book of Hebrews. This is largely what baptism is about. When we are submitting, if you will, to being baptized, we are agreeing that we need to be baptized because Jesus said, be baptized. Part of what being baptized is about is telling other people out loud in a public way, I believe this is true. I believe in Jesus, that he's Lord, he's God. I should follow him. I want to be his disciple. I believe that his sacrifice cleanses me of my sins. I'm trusting in him and him alone, and I want other people to know about it. He died. He rose for me. I am his follower. You're telling people these things. This is a key theme that we're going to see over and over. Our salvation begins and it continues on by focusing on Jesus. Our passage goes on. It says, focus on Jesus and focus on his faithfulness. It says, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful. Consider this, how Jesus was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all of God's house. A key reason, it seems, that the whole book of Hebrews was written is because people back in the day were struggling. They were struggling with being consistent. They were struggling with actually living out their faith. They were getting beat up in life, it seems. So he's writing this to admonish, to correct, to challenge the church. Refocus as a struggling body. They were getting pressures from the world, maybe. Pressures, temptations to live worldly, to just give up on this faith thing because it's difficult to live out. Pressures from actually being a Christian, maybe coming into conflict with others back in the day, just for the very fact that they were a Christian and trying to live that out. Likely pressures from the enemy, actual spiritual attack on them to force them or try to get them to give up and roll over and not work so hard as a Christian. That's why we read a few weeks ago where the writer says, he has defeated our enemy, the devil. You don't have to fear him any longer. The exhortation, the calling of Hebrews is, continue to run your race faithfully because you are a disciple of Jesus and he lived faithfully. Consider, it says, Jesus, who was faithful to the one who appointed him. There's some significant theology in that. I don't have time to break all this down, but basically, Jesus was appointed by the Father. He was appointed to fulfill a mission, to fulfill a calling, to fulfill his office. This thing he was tapped to do. Just one example I thought of. There's probably dozens I could have come up with, but if you're tapped and anointed something in society to do something, like I thought about, let's say you sign your kid up to do a sports league like soccer or something, and they need a parent coach. If you're a parent coach of a soccer league or whatever it is, baseball or whatever, and you show up, you actually have to fulfill what you were called and asked and signed up to do. You have to be that coach of soccer. If I was to show up and coach soccer, and I tried to teach all these kids to tackle each other and kick a football through a field goal, that wouldn't be it'd be like American football, not European football. That wouldn't be soccer. It'd be something else. I have to actually fulfill what I was called to do, not make it something else. If I was a parent coach and I showed up and I just sat around and the kids just said, y'all get it, they'll figure it out, just run around for a little bit. I wasn't actually fulfilling my calling as a coach. Then we would not be fulfilling what we are called to do. Jesus was faithful, absolutely, in what he was appointed to do. As an apostle, he definitely came as a person. As a priest, he definitely made a sacrifice, the only sacrifice that was meaningful for humanity. As the founder of our faith, the beginning of our faith, definitely fulfilled that. We always look back and say Jesus and Jesus alone is the one we follow. He's the champion of our faith. He's the author of our faith. He's the perfecter of our faith. All these things Jesus began to do and continues to do for his people. And the strong hint here in our passage, and it will go on, we have to fulfill our calling as disciples, as ambassadors, as priests ourselves, as servants of his. We have to fulfill what we were called to do. And then it begins, chapter 3 here, beginning in verse 2 and then on into 3 and really all the way through 6. What we're going to see is this comparison and contrast between Jesus and Moses. And even more than the person of Moses, as we'll see as Hebrews goes on, it's all the things that Moses did. All the stuff that happened to God's people all during the lifetime and time frame of Moses. So he's going to compare Jesus to Moses in a good way, like they both did these things. And then he's going to contrast Jesus with Moses and say, Moses did this, but Jesus did that. And we read about it here. He was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses was also faithful in all God's house. For Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses. So he's going to describe, and we'll get to some of this, like a physical house versus a family tree type house. And then he's comparing and contrasting this work of Jesus to the works of Moses. Much like he contrasted Jesus with angels in chapter 1, he contrasts Jesus with Moses here. It's very difficult for us to sort of get how radical this was, like how significant this would have been for people back in the day, because we don't like revere Moses like this, or we don't have a lot of things to compare it to, maybe like it hit them. To read that back in the day would have been almost shocking to people. Like Jesus is worth more glory than Moses. It might have been way more shocking than to say Jesus is worth more glory than angels. They would have read that and said, yeah, you're right. But then when he turns and says Jesus is worth more glory than Moses, they would have been like, whoa, now you're going a little too far. Jesus is worth more glory than Moses. We might begin to get it if we sort of consider like our Islamic friends. If you've interacted with Islamic peoples very much, you know that they are focused a lot on Muhammad. What he said, what he did, what he wrote, and the things of Muhammad guide them in their life, like their culture is built around that. So to say Jesus is worth more glory than any figure would begin to hit them, much like it hit people back in the day saying Jesus is worth more glory than Moses. Perhaps our Buddhist friends who focus on the person and the works of Buddha and look back to him all the time, and their culture is built around the Buddha and what he guided people to do. So to say any other figure is worth more glory, focus on him is the only one, would perhaps hit us. Any cult leader in America, how a leader's words and his choices guide people's view of life, like people look and hear unquestioningly of some cult leader, would hit them really starkly in the face, like you can't question that. Begin to get at this radical point the writer was making. Jesus and Jesus alone is the only one we should focus on in this life. His words should guide all of our culture, not other cultural voices. His guidance of how to live this life and how we assess the choices that we make. He and he alone is worth all of our focus, glorying in him, celebrating him, appreciating him. That is what Hebrews and really the whole of the Bible is all about. Okay. Now for something completely different. John, you want to throw up that first picture of a house. Look at this picture of a beautiful house I found on the internet. Is it not in there? Imagine, if you will. I didn't put the pictures of houses in there. I definitely downloaded them. They're on my computer here. You know what? Hold on. Ha-ha. I don't know if you guys can see this, though. Look at that beautiful house. Imagine yourself living in this wonderful home. Or this one. Just a beautiful, big house. Can you see it from back there, Pat? You know, probably whatever that is, 4-bedroom, 2-car garage on that guy. Well built. Can you imagine living in these homes? Or maybe this one. This is interesting. What about that one? Would you even want to live in that one right there? I don't know. That's unique type of house, right? When you see these houses, you're driving, across St. Louis, or you're driving around town for whatever reason. You see these houses, you might think, oh, I'd love to live in that house. That's kind of cool. You may or may not compare it to your house or whatever. But what you don't do, at least I never do till I read this passage, is think about, I wonder who built that house. Like you might say, oh, I wonder how many bedrooms it has. I wonder if it's got carpet or hardwood floors or whatever it is. But we rarely ever think. Now, we may think how old it is. I wonder how old that house is. But who built it? Like nobody generally thinks. So it's kind of hard, again, for us to connect with what our writer is saying here. When he begins to think about who builds houses and how the builder of the house is worth more glory than the house itself. We tend, as Americans, as materialists often, to glorify the house. But he says, think about not just the house is just a thing. The person who built it. This is what he's getting. He's making a point out of this here. He says, Jesus is worth more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, in his big point here, but the builder of all things is God. You may be a great and talented architect and have this beautiful house that people at least remember. And you may be perhaps remembered more than the house itself if you create something really unique. But his point here is God is the architect of all things. All things. He is driving this home, and we'll see it all throughout the book of Hebrews, but it's a big point of the Bible. God is the architect of all. He is sovereign over all. He is in charge over all. He has designed all things in this life to work out according to his purposes. Life itself designed by God. How our earliest forefathers, the choices that they had, designed by God. Our new life, being in the kingdom, being saved, being part of God's family, designed by God. His house, if you will, house of faith, house of people of faith, followers, disciples, designed by God. How it works out that we look to his Son and his Son alone for salvation, so that the Son is glorified more than anything else ever will be glorified, designed by God. God is the architect of all. Our life, our purposes in this life, designed by God. And that will be important as our passage goes, and it's important to all the Bible. Our passage again comes back to this comparison and contrast with Moses and Jesus to wrap up. It says, "Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant, to testify to the things that were to be spoken of later, but Christ is faithful over God's house as a son, and we are his house, if indeed we hold fast our confidence and are boasting in our hope." His main point here is contrast of Moses and Jesus, and begins by saying, now they both were faithful. Let's just recognize that. Moses was faithful, Jesus is faithful. But then he quickly pivots. The comparison is that Moses was faithful and Jesus was faithful, but then he contrasts. But Moses was faithful as a servant. He's going to tell us what Jesus was faithful as a son. But he says an interesting thing here. Moses was faithful as a servant as he pointed to the things that were to be spoken of later. He testified to, he spoke of, he wrote down the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, but the purpose of those things were to point to testify to the things that were to be spoken of later. What he's saying here is that all of the things that happened to Moses, all the things that happened in the Exodus and Numbers and all of that stuff pointed us to the gospel, pointed us to the kingdom, pointed us to the Son. All of these works, probably you could take it as all the works of the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, but he's definitely talking about Moses here. All of Moses' lifetime. God used Moses to go into this place where people were chained up in slavery, where they had been writhing in darkness for a long time, crying out to God for deliverance. God used Moses to go into that place and lead people out into freedom, out into an encounter with God at this place called Mount Sinai. That will be important in the book of Hebrews later on. He used Moses to call people out of slavery, call people into a encounter with him at this great, powerful moment. And then they went out and they were going to the promised land. On the way to the promised land, they had to struggle through this dry desert wilderness type place, struggling with all these challenges and difficulties. But eventually, by faith, they made their way into the promised land where they actually were given a rest. And they became a big, huge throng of people. Commentators believe millions and millions of people became that early country called Israel. God had created this house, this people for himself. And the writer of Hebrews says all of that points to the gospel, points to the kingdom, points to the Son. That's what Moses was faithful to do. Our passage today closes out with one more deep and significant biblical theology here. It says, and we, church, we are his house. He's talking here, let me just remind us, he's talking to the holy brothers, those who have a heavenly calling. We are his house, but it uses a huge word here that's very small word, but very big meaning. And we are his house if we are his, there's an if here. That's huge. And we are his house if, indeed, we hold fast our confidence and our boasting and our hope. a major point here. If indeed we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope. A key theme of the book that we're going to see over and over, this exhortation, the reason he's writing to people and so insistent on being faithful. Faithfulness and endurance in the struggle, in the race that we read a moment ago. The tests of life, if you will. God, the builder of all things, orchestrator of all things, conductor, if you will, of all things, he even orchestrates the tests in our life, like what happened to the Hebrew people with Moses that I described a moment ago. He even orchestrates the tests in our life because they are all part and parcel of our salvation. The tests of life and our victories in them, they consummate, they baptize, they seal up our faith, like a varnish or like a glaze, like a shellac, if you will, when you paint something. It completes the work. This is mysterious. I will admit this is mysterious, but it is also sobering and it is also a biblical truth. Faith begins by looking to Jesus and Jesus alone. There is nothing we do to get our salvation, but faith is completed and made whole by living it out, succeeding in the test that Jesus brings to prove out to the world, to the angels that are watching, to the Holy Spirit that's inside of us, if indeed he's inside of us, to we ourselves, that our faith is real. It's actually grounded. It's actually a real faith. This is a biblical theme. It's seen a lot in the book of Hebrews. One of the commentaries that I read said nowhere else in the Bible does this point be driven home over and over and over again, but it is definitely seen throughout the Bible. Just one example, I could turn to many. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, classic passage on the gospel. It explains the gospel clearly. Paul writes, now I would remind you, brothers, again, now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel that I preached to you, which you received, in which you stand, and by which you are being saved, if, he uses the word if again there, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. And he goes on in that passage to talk about the death of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, this people seeing Jesus resurrected from the dead, the ascension of Jesus up into heaven, the return of Jesus, all the faith things that we are to believe in. But he says you have to hold fast to that, live it out in this life, bear forth that you actually believe it. Like John the Baptist described when he was calling people and he was pointing to Jesus. John the Baptist prepared the way. He said, bring forth fruits in keeping with repentance. Don't just say something and then don't go do it. It matters, both what you say and how you live it out. The brother of Jesus, James, wrote a large book in the Bible. This was one of his key points. Faith without works is dead faith. It's not real. Believe and live it out. They go together. If it's real faith, they will go together. Jesus, the reason James said that, the reason Paul says this, the reason that Hebrews says this is because Jesus said this. Luke chapter 8, he said in a parable, a sower went out to sow his seed. And as he sowed, some fell along the path and was trampled underfoot, and the birds of the air devoured it. And some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it then withered away, because it had no moisture. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up with it and choked it. And some fell into good soil and grew and yielded 100-fold. And he said these things. He called out, he who has ears, let him hear. Later he said, now the parable is this. The seed is the word of God. The ones along the path are those who have heard the word, then the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts so that they may not believe and be saved. And the ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the word, they receive it with joy, but because they have no root, they believe for a while, and in time of testing, they fall away. This should be a sobering and a fearful truth. But when I say fearful, I don't mean like scared that you can lose your salvation, because that's not what this is saying. It's saying if you have salvation, you will succeed in testing. But if you are saved, succeed in testing. Be faithful to him who calls you. And it doesn't tell you which tests that is that does this. Probably numerous tests throughout our life that prove and bear out we truly are followers. But you can count on it. If you are a believer, there will be tests to prove out that you actually are a believer. This is mysterious. I don't want to lose either side of this, the fear of the Lord, or give any of us false encouragement. But the grace of the Lord is he builds all things. He is the builder of all. So if he has called us, if we are in his house, if we are his children, he will empower us to succeed in the testing so that he gets glorified. It's not even us that does the succeeding. It's his Spirit in us accomplishing the success in the tests of life so that he and he alone is glorified, not even us. This is mysterious, and I can't exactly explain it all, but it's biblical. We are his house, we are his saints, and we will persevere. Let me pray.